Hello. You are attending Can You Actually Teach the Kindness webinar, and we're going to give it a minute or so to let people join. In the meantime, please share your name, role, and organization in the chat. And we'll get started real soon with a great conversation about building a culture of kindness in schools. That's great. I see some folks sharing their role and their names and organizations. A lot of school counselors. Welcome, everyone. Um, it's wonderful to see everyone here. We're going to have a great conversation. Again, this is the webinar, Can You Actually Teach Kindness? And we have a great conversation coming up. We're just going to give it one more minute to let more folks join us and we'll get started. Great. Look at all the folks joining us from all over. I'm in Washington, D.C., and we had some ice and snow, and I saw so many acts of kindness, people helping neighbors dig out, lend ski pants. Kindness is all around us. And I think we're ready to get started. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Kara Arundel. I'm the moderator of today's webinar. I am a senior reporter with K-12 Dive. That's an online education news site. We provide insights into the most impactful news and trends shaping K-12 education. And I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to start with some housekeeping notes. We're recording today's session, and the recording will be shared with everyone who registered. Again, the chat is going to be open. Please keep introducing yourselves. There's also a Q&A feature, and please submit questions throughout the conversation. We have a Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar is hosted by Whiteboards Advisors and Teach Kindness. And we're excited to be joined by a great group of panelists, our kindness experts. I'll introduce them. We have Jill Cook, who is the Executive Director of the American School Counselor Association. Steve Solwich is the producer and director of the Case for Kindness documentary. Brandy Watts is the director of Teach Kindness, and Jennifer Mangallo is the principal of Palmer Elementary in Chicago Public Schools. Welcome to everybody and our excellent panelists. I'm going to start with an icebreaker question to all the panelists. And I'm going to ask all our panelists to answer with one sentence. What lens are you bringing to today's conversation? And let's start with Jill.
Well, thank you so much. And a big shout out to all the school counselors joining us today. That's so lovely to see you all here. And so, certainly, my lens is a school counselor lens. I see teaching kindness as both a preventive and foundational part of supporting students' social, emotional, and academic growth and development.
Great. And Stephen, can you add?
Yeah, no, I'm coming to the conversation as a storyteller, not necessarily an expert, but telling stories on how people have, given the space to be human. They've, they're asked to be right. And I've seen moments of conflicts and disagreement change that kindness is our answer forward.
Great. And Brandy?
Hi, everybody. I am a former middle school teacher, so I'm coming to this conversation with a great deal of respect for how challenging that work can be, and also a strong belief in the impact that educators can have on students, especially when they have support.
Excellent. And Jennifer?
Hi, my name's Jennifer Mangallo. I'm the principal of Palmer Elementary School in Chicago. And the lens that I come before you today is that of a school leader, a principal who is guiding all of her staff, families, and students to show empathy and kindness to each other in all the imperfect ways that we kind of operate.
Excellent. Thank you all. I also want to point out to our attendees, we're adding links to the Case for Kindness documentary and Palmer Elementary. So be on the lookout for that. My next question is also for all our panelists. There's a lot of talk about a crisis of rudeness and eroding empathy. What are you seeing in your work that confirms or complicates that narrative? And Stephen, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of real frustration and fatigue out there, and that can complicate things, greatly. And, many people are overwhelmed, hurt, or afraid. And, kindness is also often I'd say the first thing that gets sacrificed. And, it's mainly when people feel threatened. But I think empathy can come back quickly. And when someone listens without trying to like win, something, changes almost immediately. And, their tone softens and curiosity shows up.
Excellent. Brandy, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think it feels like we are a lot less patient than we have been in the past, less tolerant of inconvenience, less aware of people's feelings or less responsive to those feelings. And I think a big part of it is because we have this tech in our hands every day that has trained us that we don't have to be patient and we don't have to be tolerant. We can, search for something and immediately have it in front of us, get something delivered to your doorstep in just, a matter of days or hours. You can, if you're looking for some information, you can type a quick Google search and then you can get a stream of results right away. And now with AI, you don't even have to dig through the results. You can just get a summary paragraph right at the beginning. But it's not that way when we're interacting with humans. If you're trying to get some information from me, I might go this way and then bring in something that I thought of that's related. And if that's not how you're used to receiving information, that intolerance for the round the world style of communication can make you frustrated. And I think a lot of the frustrations that that we're seeing show up as rudeness. So if we want people to be able to interact with humans and not just tech, we got to make sure we're training folks on the human skills.
Great. And Jennifer?
I think so much of what we see with regard to the crisis of rudeness is actually a fear of vulnerability that people have, and also a need to control when things feel out of control, and not being well practiced in how to handle vulnerable situations and how to kind of let yourself slow down enough to assess circumstances and situations and kind of see what's happening in the world around you, and taking the time to that it requires to understand the perspectives of others. I think sometimes people are afraid of being wrong or like admitting wrongness when there's been a negative impact of that wrongness. And then it goes back to that fear of what might happen if I admit that, I was wrong in that circumstance, or that I felt so rushed and, inside on myself that I didn't take a moment to consider the impact that my actions had on others, and that's kind of pervasive right now. And it goes to what Brandy was saying about how fast paced things tend to be, that I think in order to kind of have empathy, you have to take an empathetic moment, if you will.
Great. And Jill?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said. And, crisis can feel like a rather dramatic word, but I do think there are credible concerns, both in research and what we see in the schools, about how interactions are less empathetic than we'd like. And we know, and school counselors see this, lower empathy is linked to bullying, to relational conflict, emotional harm. And educators see how the social media and the stress and the societal pressures amplify the challenges. But at the same time, as we've said, it's complicated because students are so capable of incredible empathy and pro-social behavior, especially when they are supported and taught explicitly how to practice it and given the opportunities to practice kindness, not just in school, but in all areas. And from my school counselor lens, this is something school counselors do every day through lessons, modeling the positive relationships, small group work, working with school leaders on climate building initiatives. And for school counselors, our association has a set of student standards. We call them mindsets and behaviors that really get at how school counselors can contribute to that work.
Excellent. Great. This next question is for Stephen. You spent years making your documentary film, Case for Kindness, interviewing everyone from the Dalai Lama to Garth Brooks. What's the most important thing you learned about why kindness matters and why it can be so hard to find?
Yeah, I mean, I think, being able to interview a lot of the people that I did from, like you said, the Dalai Lama to Garth Brooks to interviewed a lot of professors and scientists that work with about kindness from Stanford, Berkeley, and UCLA. And, one of the questions I asked everybody is, why is kindness hard? Like we all want it and we all think it's good, but why is it so hard for us to do? And I think Jennifer mentioned this earlier I think it opens ourselves up to being vulnerable. And you don't know how someone will react to that. Will they accept it? Will they refute it or use it against me later? And, in the film, we look at a lot of different issues facing society from like bullying, hate, and racial injustice to gun control and mental health. And one of the themes I started seeing develop was how through the personal stories and the stories that we were telling, um, kindness allowed people in their darkest moments to find their purpose. And, it wasn't, and they had to go through those dark moments to get to that realization. And I think that's the great thing about kindness. It can light that inner light that can bring people together. We had a story we told of Sana, who was a student in, I want to say it was ninth grade. And she lost her hair to alopecia and she was bullied and, notes put in lockers of 100 ways to kill yourself, and people would throw gum in her wig. And one day she decided to fight back, and she took her gum and threw it into somebody else's hair, and she said it was the worst moment of her life. She didn't gain her power back. She felt horrible. And that was her moment of changing, and she talks of one of the things she said when I interviewed her is, she said, is living into who you are can be your biggest act of kindness to the world. And, and she, at that moment, she saw that's not who she was. And then she started a club about kindness and bullying, anti-bullying in school. So it's just not necessarily it's good for you, or good for someone else. It's good for you too.
Yeah, and another um, great information I got from the film was little acts of kindness can make a big difference, and that seemed powerful as well. Jill, I wanted to see if you wanted to chime in on, what is the most important thing you learned about why kindness matters, and why it can be so hard to find.
Well, as Stephen was speaking, I jumped back to a memory from earlier in my career. I had been a school counselor, a middle school counselor for 7 years, and I was tapped when we had an administrator shortage to become an assistant principal. And one of the things most people at my school said, you're too kind, you're too nice to be a principal, to be an administrator. And I was like, wow. That just took me by surprise that kindness was in, we know the saying that kindness doesn't mean I'm weak, or it was interpreted in such a way that I couldn't be an effective leader. But as I learned, and as I'm sure so many people know, the skills I had as a school counselor, including being a kind and nice person, served me incredibly well as an administrator. It's changing that lens in which I guess we see this sometimes, kindness matters. It's foundational to healthy relationships, to resilience, to emotional well-being. It helps students with their learning, with their mental well-being, and contributing to that positive school climate. But as we've noted, we're in a high stress, digital amplified world where cruelty is lifted up often. And when students are seeing that, young people are seeing that, sometimes that can make it difficult to showcase how kindness matters. But I think schools and are the perfect place where we can help reinforce this concept and teach empathy and model kindness and create these environments of caring.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to stick with you for the next question. Today's young people are growing up in an era defined by both hyperconnection and deep loneliness. So, how is this generation's relationship to kindness different from previous ones, maybe their parents?
Yeah, and what we hear from school counselors across the country, the social media and the constant digital visibility, it means students are always on stage, but at the same time, many feel isolated and unseen and anxious about fitting in. And unlike when I was growing up, when I still had the phone with the long cord that was on the wall. Kindness and unkindness, it is instantaneous, it is public, it can be viral, which magnifies both harm and opportunity. So, that makes the empathy, perspective taking, and respectful communication just so much more critical. But it's also challenging if there isn't guidance, if there aren't conversations, not just at schools, but with families and communities. And again, I think school counselors are just the most remarkable people in school buildings, and they are just in such a unique position in schools that to help. It's not solely on the school counselor, and it's not a siloed thing, but to be part of a school-wide effort and initiative and conversation to help lead these efforts and to help create this explicit instruction and small group lessons, and how can we as adults in the school building model these positive relationships.
Right. And like you said before, the American School Counselor Association has those student standards to
Mhm.
refer to. Jennifer, I'm wondering if you would like to add to that about the hyperconnection and deep loneliness that conflict and this generation's relationship to kindness.
Yeah, so we definitely see that happening in schools, and I'm sure all of you who work in schools who are on this webinar have seen it yourself. We have students who are interacting with each other online. They can't see each other face to face. The ship or dip trend just came up at my school on TikTok. If you're not familiar with that, that's brand new. And so we're handling things like that as a school community all the time. But I think that it's so important to have, systems and structures already set up to address these kinds of, problems, specifically with, social media. We have sessions for parents to go to so they can learn how to manage their own child's, social media accounts. But I think that loneliness and isolation that students might feel, or the disconnection that they feel from maybe spending time online, can be remedied in schools by having opportunities for students to build connection. And it could be as simple as having clubs that are based on student interests and having kids. We did have one instance where a class was having problems with one another, and we ended up doing an affinity project with them where they would learn about each other's interests and then get together to create expert posters on their interests. And this is just one simple strategy for a whole class who's having a hard time getting along with one another. I think that having opportunities for students to have student voice. We have a student voice committee at our school, so students can recognize problems in our school community and then work together with two teacher advisors, one being our school counselor, and come up with problems. So, for example, when SNAP benefits were reduced, threatened, canceled. It looked different, I guess, in different places. Our students saw an issue and they ran a food drive in order to create a school food pantry for our school. And then we worked with our political stakeholders to get turkeys and did a big, huge, you know, local school food drive where students and community came together to make sure that everyone had the food they needed for our Thanksgiving break coming up. And so it's giving them this agency to solve local problems, build connection through finding, spaces for affinity groups. And I think making sure that your curriculum is representative of the vastness of your student population is just really super important. So, for example, we worked with the Human Rights Campaign, and I can talk more about that later in a different question, to become, we're the first welcoming school as designated by the Human Rights Campaign in the state of Illinois. And that involved making sure that our classroom libraries, for example, had books representative of all family structures and included membership and the history of teaching of the perspectives of people from the LGBTQ plus community. And so, like, that's just another way that we make sure that kids see themselves every day in the school. That kind of helps build that connection that I'm not alone and that my identity and all aspects of it, including, we talk a lot about the intersectionality of everyone's identity, and just making sure that it's represented and that kids feel like they have voice and a place at school. It really helps get them, from that online world into the real world to kind of build relationships in person with each other.
Gosh, you guys are giving so many good tips and strategies and approaches. Thank you so much. I just want to remind our attendees we are adding links to some of what we're talking about, some of the conversations, some resources, some links in the chat. So open up the chat to keep keep updated on that. My next question is to Brandy. Brandy, you were in the classroom for a decade before your role as Director of Teach Kindness. How did your experience inform your views on teaching kindness? And how does Teach Kindness help educators with that now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I learned a lot in that decade in the classroom. I started my career as a special education teacher, which I think is one of the very best places to start to get a good foundation regarding learning. And I did a lot of behavior intervention work. And I learned really quickly that punishment doesn't teach behavior. That's something I had to learn as a new educator, that when I was giving my students negative consequences for their, dysregulated or bad behavior, basically I was sending them away for a little while, hoping that they would figure out on their own how to behave appropriately. And basically that was the longest road possible to improvement. And I started having a lot more success, and my students were more successful when I started to really intentionally teach them the skills that I wanted them to demonstrate when it came to behavior. So I would practice with them, like, here are things you can do when you're upset, and here's language you can use when you're frustrated, or somebody's bothering you. Here's language to use with classmates. Here's language you can use with teachers. And I would give them really, really specific instructions, and we would practice those behaviors. And it worked. I would hear students using the language that I had handed them when they were, having difficult times. I'd hear them saying things like, I'm a little frustrated right now. Can I take a moment to calm down before I respond? Well, yeah, you can. What teacher is going to say no to that, right? And then eventually I realized it wasn't just the students with IEPs who needed that kind of support, who needed to practice self-regulation, who needed help with the language to express themselves. All students need that. All people need that instruction and that practice, if we're going to be able to be in relation with one another well. I think about I began to notice, and I still think about the difference between how we teach academic skills and how we teach behavior skills. and it's like night and day. So for academic skills, we're always careful to, make real world connections and tell students why this information is important. And we model and we give them a guided practice, an independent practice. And when they struggle, we might circle back to some targeted reinstruction. And we're not mad at them when they get it wrong. But when I think about how I was initially handling student behavior, it was really different from that. But I learned that if we teach behavior skills, skills of kindness, skills of communication and self-regulation, if we teach those like we teach academic skills, then we have a lot more success. And these behavior skills are, they are survival skills. I watched Case for Kindness, and anybody who cares enough about this to be in this webinar, I think you will really get a lot out of that film, Case for Kindness. And one of the things they talked about was how Darwin's survival of the fittest, that theory of evolution that we all understand, how what it means to be fit has been kind of misinterpreted. We think being fit means you're the strongest and you're the most powerful, and those are the folks that survive. But really, it's survival of the sympathetic and survival of the compassionate. The people who are going to survive are the ones who know how to communicate, who know how to self-regulate, who know how to collaborate and build and survive in community. But young people aren't going to learn that organically, or if they do, it's going to take a lot of trial and error. It's going to take a lot of missteps and a lot of time. And so we can get students way further down the road faster if we teach the skills, you know, explicitly. Um, and that's what Teach Kindness provides some resources for educators to do that. We provide lessons on foundational skills. It's not a complicated curriculum. It is a set of lessons that offer conversations you can have with students and then an opportunity for them to practice these survival skills. And schools are saying that it's helpful, it's working. We just received this year's Kind School designation applications. So these are schools that have um, gotten students and staff together to define what kindness means on their campus, and then they've taught kindness skill lessons at a certain density and implemented school-wide projects and practices so that kindness becomes a part of the fabric of the school and a part of the identity of the school, and students can flex those kindness muscles. And it's making an impact. Teaching it explicitly and then giving an opportunity to practice is really not only impacting student behavior, but it's impacting how educators see their ability to impact student behavior. One of the schools said that it's shifted their school culture from reacting to student behavior to proactively teaching their students the skills that they need to thrive.
That's great. And that's called the Kind School designation.
Yeah.
Excellent. Stephen, I was wondering if you could add to what Brandy said about the modeling, practicing, being intentional with kindness.
Yeah, I think, I've seen it on a larger scale with um, one of the stories we tell in the film is about Tom Tate, and who was the former mayor of Anaheim, who created this first city of kindness. And one of the things he was doing was he was enacting kindness in their whole school districts. And, they were trying to get 1 million acts of kindness in 1 year, and they far succeeded that. And one of the biggest things that he saw is, by doing this, their grades went up, attendance went up, detentions went down, and just how it affected the students overall. And I think, when I was going to school, you weren't taught any of this. And, everything focused on the negatives of, if it was about, the disabilities or, you couldn't show your emotions. And I think now, it is leaning more towards social and emotional learning, and, being able to teach kindness and focus on that positivity and help people and communicate about their feelings.
Excellent. And Jill, I was wondering also if you had anything to add about, the modeling or being intentional with teaching kindness in schools, the student supports for this.
Absolutely. It's so important. And so when school counselors or all, not just the teachers, all the adults in a school building who interact with students every day, when they consistently model kindness and empathy and respect, they really help establish those norms for how adults and students should treat one another. Students learn just as much from what we model as what we teach. Um, and I just from my own perspective as a school counselor and in my work, I know just often the school counselor's office can sort of be a barometer of how that's working in a school. But we also know that students can't fully engage in learning and career exploration and decision making when they feel unseen or unsafe or devalued. And so practicing the kindness, especially in moments of conflict or fear or even failure, it can help students build trust and emotional regulation and resilience. So I really liked what Brandy talked about, that it's a skill we can help develop, and there are ways we can help students develop that. And I think maybe we talk a lot about school climate and a safe and supportive school climate. And I think it's not just looking at it from the student perspective, but the whole school perspective. If this is a priority for how we want our community to interact is really important.
Excellent. And moving along with that, Jennifer, I'm hoping you could talk a little bit more about Palmer Elementary and how it's become a model for this work, and sort of walk us through what kindness looks like day to day in your building.
Yeah, it mentioned when I started about things being imperfect. And I think that it's important when you're starting a journey towards becoming a more kind school is to accept the fact that this is imperfect work, but that the work itself and the effort that it takes to, make a kind school climate is where the change actually happens. And I agree with what Jill had said. And I was writing while she was talking about how it's the entire school community. And I was thinking back to work that we even do with our staff. Our staff has had Dare to Lead training, as well as unique experiences. For example, there's an organization in Chicago called the Voxus, VOXUS experience, where we've had our staff engage in group singing. Because did you know that choirs, their hearts start to sync the beats? Like inside, this is at least what we've been told. I don't have the scientific evidence, but we've been told that when groups sing together, they have lots of strong connections and bonds with one another. And there's this singer in Chicago that will bring your group together. And once, years ago, after we had learned of a school shooting, um, our staff was feeling really overwhelmed. And it just so happened that we had a session with Davin Youngs from Vox's Experience, and he came and we all sang together, and just felt everyone was singing all day, after that. And then there's a group called Second Story, where during the pandemic, our parents were feeling really, stressed out and scared and isolated. And it was a time in Chicago where there were many Black Lives Matter marches going on, and people wanted to do good work and wanted spaces that they could talk to each other. And Second Story is an organization where individuals tell stories, and those stories prompt others to share familiar experiences. And the idea is that first storyteller modeling vulnerability and sharing a story that models, their humanity, gives other people the bravery to step forward and be vulnerable themselves and share. And we've built lots of connections. We're a school with many Middle Eastern students, and in around the 2020 times, there were many decisions that were made that were negatively affecting our Arabic and Muslim student population. And they felt very scared. And Second Story helped them feel included and heard. I think also, and I'm telling kind of a long story here, but there's so much that goes into being a kind school. But I think it starts with having good structures in place. Like we have a behavioral health team that's comprised of our counselor, an administrator. We're fortunate to have two social workers, two counselors, a psychologist here on staff at our school, and as well as our lead MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support response to intervention, teacher. And those teams, we have a referral document where the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, the SDQ, is built into our school-wide referral document, and students who might require tier 2 or tier 3 interventions for emotional needs are referred, and we get that SDQ data back, and our team of experts at the school are able to assign interventions, including rainbows or skill streaming. There's lots of interventions that this team is trained in that they could target students who need. But then there's this overall school culture. And so I already talked about the Welcoming Schools program from the Human Rights Campaign, but we also partnered with the Anti-Defamation League. They have a program called No Place for Hate. We're a restorative practices leadership school. Our staff has been specifically trained in the use of restorative practices. And you might hear people say restorative justice. So we tend not to say restorative justice because we want to avoid using language from the justice system. So we say restorative practices. But they're just these opportunities that our students have to do either whole class talking circles or restorative conversations to really practice and strengthen those muscles around fixing things when they've gone wrong. Because perfect places don't exist. They will never exist. There's no perfect place. There's no secret utopia somewhere. It's all about creating systems and structures where people in their humanity, when they make mistakes, they have the support to be able to, and the bravery that it requires to admit it and fix it. That requires a lot of, resiliency, if you would say. I don't know if I have time to add one more thing. But when we think about kindness at Palmer, we also think about how we're kind to the earth and kind to animals. And so we were recently named a Green Ribbon School, and we have a teacher in charge of a composting program. And so we have 750 students, and only 2 bags of landfill waste come out of our cafeteria every day. That's because most of the trash is compostable. And so we are kind to the earth, and we are kind to animals because we run a chicken coop on our grounds.
I love that. I love that. And so many great examples, Jennifer. You talked about the systems and structures and being in place, but you also talked about partnering with community organizations or even international organizations. Amazing. Stephen, I was wondering if you wanted to add to this, sort of what would this look like? How to reinforce and sustain a culture of kindness?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture and kindness, it takes, intention and as Jennifer said, structure, it's practice. Kindness can't survive on just good feelings alone. It has to be modeled, reinforced, and protected, especially when things get hard. And, it's like a muscle. If we only use it when it's convenient, it'll weaken. And, when we practice it every day, especially in small, like unglamorous ways, like small acts of kindness, and it becomes a part of rather, I think, who we are and something we talk about, as opposed to just utilizing it only during, the times when we need it.
Excellent. And Jill, I'm hoping you can also add to this conversation. Sort of what does this look like practically in schools when school counselors are often such thin? How does kindness fit into a comprehensive school counseling program without feeling like one more thing or a box to check?
Thank you so much for that question. Today's school counselors are not the guidance counselors of old, where they might just have helped students getting in their college applications or students who might have had behavioral problems. Today, school counselors work with each and every student in a school. They are not reactive, they are proactive and use student and school data to create their comprehensive school counseling programs, and to create their goals and align them with the school improvement goals and the district's goals. It's not an ancillary thing in schools anymore. But we do know school counselors are stretched thin. The national average is one school counselor for every 376 students, and ASCA recommends one for every 250 students. But how school counselors do this work? So our association 20 years ago created a model for school counseling programs. And so it gives a framework and it gives us constant and consistent language about what school counselors do. Before then, what happened in one school may have been different in another school, all in the same district. And often school counselors, and still today sometimes, at the whim of what a principal needs or wants. So it's not all students aren't getting the same thing. But when school counselors are given the time and the space and the support to implement a comprehensive school counseling program using the national model, using student data to create your lessons, to determine what kind of small groups and interventions you're going to offer, where they're seeing gaps, opportunity resource gaps, and how a school counselor can intervene with small groups of students to address those, the impact is clear. I mean, we know kindness and social and emotional learning are not extra. They're embedded in the work school counselors do across their classroom instruction in small groups and work with teachers and classes and families. And we know that data shows us that when it's fully implemented, that there higher academic achievement, fewer behavior issues, stronger school climate, fewer absenteeism. So today's school counselors are really proactive and preventive, and not the guidance counselor of old who told you shouldn't go to college or that you shouldn't think, no, why do you want to be a doctor? You can't do that. I really see them moving the needle for all students in a school.
Great. Excellent. Now, my next question is for all the panelists. Kindness doesn't stop at the schoolhouse door. So, how can we as a community build a shared ecosystem that models and sustains kindness across generations? And Stephen, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think it can't survive just on good feelings alone. It has to be modeled, reinforced, protected, especially when things get hard. And one thing that I've learned is that kindness grows where it's normalized. And when leaders can start showing it publicly, when schools are able to start teaching it, like Teach for Kindness has their programs in out schools, but doing it everywhere, and workplace starts rewarding the collaboration and not just the outcomes. And, it stops feeling optional and starts feeling expected. And I think that's just one of the biggest reasons things is that it starts with you and how you present yourself and how you show up every day.
Excellent. And Brandy, would you like to chime in?
Yeah. I think schools are a great place for this work to start because we have, the framework set up to teach kids. And then we have the ability to pull in community members. So I think as schools begin embedding kindness into their culture, a good next step is to then pull in families and pull in community and share those frameworks and language that Jill spoke about being so powerful. Share those with family members and folks in your community because then they get to be models for the young people that you're trying to instruct. And in creating those models, you're actually creating more kindness in the community as well. If you're asking parents to model language that they would use when they're frustrated for the benefit of the kids, right? Well, the parents are learning it as well. If you're asking community members to, join in on our school-wide project, come help us work in our chicken coop or come help us with this canned food drive, the adults are modeling and then the adults are learning and becoming more kind as well. And I think a mindset shift is one of the most important things that we can do in order to spread kindness beyond just the school walls. And I think the shift in mindset that is helpful is to treat everybody like a learner and not a chooser. So assume that people are learning how to be kind versus choosing to be kind or unkind. So I think that changes the heart of our interaction with people, with the kids that we're trying to guide, but with people just out in the world as well. I talked about the difference between how we treat behavior and how we treat academic skills. And I think about how we would respond to someone if we discovered that they couldn't read. Well,
Mhm.
we would be really compassionate and we would be gentle. Our correction would be soft and quiet. And, like the older they were, the longer ago that they should have learned those skills, the more compassionate we would be. Well, what if we responded that way when we discovered that someone had not yet learned how to be kind?
Mhm.
If we shift our mindset and think this is a skill that people need to that if they have learned or not learned, that they need to acquire, I think it changes how we respond and how we interact with each other. And I know that's not easy, right? That takes a lot of emotional regulation when someone is being unkind near you. We feel like it's to us, but people have, these big complex lives and we're small parts in them. But if we could make that mindset shift and say, kindness is this skill and some people have learned it, and some people are still working on it. We're all still working on it. I think just those one-on-one interactions, our everyday interactions, will become more kind, and then that multiplies, and we have kinder communities and kinder world.
Great. And Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
Um, yeah, again, so I think that number one, if you are having kind initiatives start up at your school, you should make your work public so that people know that that's a focus. And so it can be really clear. How you make your work public is, however you'd like to, but it should be known that you're doing that. Um, One thing that we've found a lot of success with beyond the schoolhouse is partnering with our political stakeholders. Um, they have a lot of influence. Of course, we know our state representatives, our state senators make a lot of decisions for each of our states. And so you should know who they are and you should build relationships with them and you should make sure they know all about your work so that the decisions that they're making for your state can be guided by the priorities of the schools in your communities. And we partner with them in small ways too. So, like many of our political stakeholders recently got together to write Valentine's Day cards for senior citizens. So, all of our students right now are writing Valentine's Day cards for senior citizens. Excuse me, and their offices are going to deliver them. So, these are all like the small ways. We recently wrote holiday cards for local veterans. We have a veterans home that was built in close proximity to our school. And so we worked with our political stakeholders to get all these holiday cards for veterans delivered to them. So not just like partnering with your political stakeholders, but making sure that they understand your priorities. As a school, you should know your local resources because we have like those tier one supports, right? Like, for example, at Palmer, everyone gets Second Step, everyone gets Calm Classroom, Second Step once a week, Calm Classroom every day, Success Bound in the middle school. So we have, all of these programs that are happening. But like I had mentioned before with our behavioral health team, while the people on that team are trained in small group and individual counseling supports that can be provided by whether that's our counselor, a social worker, or a psychologist. They all work together there. You need to know when children require either follow up with their pediatrician for mental health concerns. For example, the amount of suicide and homicide risk assessments that we've done recently has severely it's increased. It increases all the time. And so we have good relationships with our local hospitals. And we're able to, Illinois, we have this screening assessment support services line. It's a crisis line that we can call if students are on the public health insurance. And they'll be able to get a counselor or someone there, a crisis trainer there in our school immediately that day. And that we need to provide training for families and we need a model for families. So let's say a parent comes in and is very, very upset about something. We cannot immediately just discharge the parent's concerns. Oh, that's just a complainer. There they are again, complaining about stuff. Their feelings and concerns are also real and valid. And so it's important to recognize that when families come in, I have had families come in and complain to me. We had a child fall on the playground, and I was just screamed at for 20 minutes about it. And the child really didn't get hurt too much, but I made a call. And because I was empathetic and listening and didn't dismiss this parent, I learned that they had recently had a pregnancy loss, and their reaction to their child falling on the playground was colored by a very serious loss in their life. And so, because people would feel vulnerable sharing with me, I understand their perspective and I'm better able to model for them what kindness and empathy looks like when even handling the smallest types of things. And knowing the stories. There's so many stories. Parents have stories, teachers have stories, everybody has a story. And so, the more kind of you're able to build relationships with everybody, even people in your community who don't work at your school, just the neighbor, whomever. That's how we knew people, our chicken people in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
They have no
right.
connection. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
And Jill, I'm wondering if you wanted to add
Sure.
anything.
I just I really like what Stephen said, that kindness grows where it's normalized, and Brandy and Jennifer just elaborated on that so beautifully, in that it happens. Normalization happens in those small intentional ways: how we greet students, how we listen without rushing, how we respond to big emotions, how we advocate for students behind the scenes. And those might feel like just ordinary small moments, but they accumulate. But I think it's also to think about normalization and kindness being embedded into school policies or discipline practices and adult decision making, not just those individual interactions. It can reduce harm and really help create more inclusive environments.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you to our panelists. We're going to move right into our Q&A section now. These are questions from our attendees. The first one is for Jill and Stephen. Uh, Attendee would like to learn more about social media's impact on kindness, especially in terms of recommendations for social media phone use in school. And then with so much technology at our fingertips, does ASCA or other panelists have recommendations about policies schools can put in place regarding phones, devices, social media? So, Jill, why don't you start with that?
Thank you. Had to get off mute. Yeah, I mean, this is really our school and school district decisions in terms of how they want phones to be a part of or not be a part of the school day. I mean, technology can be such a plus and an aid, but we also, as we've said today, the it's so instantaneous. It it gives opportunity and also the opportunity for harm for students. So that those are really school and district community district decisions. We don't ASCA doesn't recommend whether schools should allow cell phones in schools. We always defer to what the district determines. But I think you can talk, and there's some great resources out there about the impact of social media. I can share those and we can add them to the recording. But we have to help students to understand how social media can impact them, how can it impact others. Like we said, it's instantaneous. There, people are it's easy to like throw darts and say mean things from behind a computer screen or from behind a cell phone. So how we can help students understand how actions might have impact, even when they're not seeing it because it's online. So it's a complicated question.
It sure is. And Stephen, I'd like to hear your input because, storytelling through social media and digital ways it's can be very powerful. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, social media can be a powerful tool or an evil thing, right? Too, and it's how you want to use it and perceive it. And one of the things I've learned about like how kindness and reacts to our body and how it affects us emotionally, physically, mentally is, you know, by watching a kind act, you get the same chemical response as by doing a kind act. And I think, with social media, there's so much out there. And I originally this documentary was 5, 6 years making because of COVID, and it originally started it and thought about it before COVID. And when COVID hit, it started seeing all these kinds of acts happening online. From teachers going to driveways to help students learn, and people helping one another, and everybody started banding together, and people started lending their talents on social media because of people who were isolated. And I started thinking like, well, maybe everybody's getting it. Maybe we don't need a documentary on kindness. It went south quick, but I think it's starts with, like I, somebody said earlier about schools and teaching it within schools, and getting the students to understand the difference is in perception, and how they perceive themselves and others, and teach kindness, essentially is what you're doing. And I think the more people that can do that, the more people and kids will start to disseminate the trash on social media and start looking for the good.
Perfect. We'd like to ask all the panelists one last question, and that is what gives you hope? Where are you seeing momentum or innovation that suggests a real culture shift towards empathy and belonging? And Stephen, we can start with you.
All right. I see hope in doing things like this, and what Teach for Kindness is doing, and what, a lot of the teachers and people watching the webinars are enacting and teaching their kids. And, the more we can do that, the stronger it'll grow. And I think we're at a time in our society where we're being forced to pick a side, and until we can start learning how to listen and start learning how to speak to each other again, and I think that starts at an early age too, then that'll start bringing people together, and the gap will close. And it fortunately comes down to the common basic personality traits is, listening and care for others. And you start to see that more and more lately. And with things in the schools and how Teach for Kindness is starting to enact that.
Excellent. And Jill, what gives you hope?
So, what gives me hope is when schools teach kindness and empathy, alongside the academic and the career development and all the things schools do, students will begin to see kindness and empathy as a strength and not a weakness. And also gives me hope that even in these difficult times, gosh, educators are just keep showing up for students. They are consistent and caring, and they advocate for their students every day, through that lens of kindness, especially in times of uncertainty and fear. And it's, I think we see a shift in how we regard empathy and kindness. And I just wanted to add a personal thing. You can't see it in my, and I'm a 60-year-old grandma, and I've had a tattoo on my wrist probably, I guess, for 8 years now, and it says "Be kind." And it's my reminder every day to live that work.
Excellent. Brandy and Jennifer, we only have one more minute. Real quick, what gives you hope? And Brandy, let's start with you.
I think, like Jill said, educators that are showing up to do this work and to meet this moment. That really gives me hope. They have a really difficult job, but year after year, more and more and more of them are showing up and saying, I want to teach my students how to be kind. And then lastly, that this shift toward framing kindness as a skill gives me hope because skills can be taught. And so knowing that there's action that we can take, I hope that makes us all more hopeful.
Great. And Jennifer?
I think it's important to remember when you're feeling overwhelmed, which is easy to do right now, that you can start where you are. Start with your neighbors, and your neighborhood always. That being kind is not radical and it's not hard to be nice. Remember that it's a journey and not a destination. And for those of us in schools, remember that when you're working in schools, it's your opportunity to create the world the way you want it to be.
Beautiful. Well, thank you to our panelists of kindness experts. What a great conversation. And thank you to our audience for attending. We're so glad you were here. And we record this webinar and you will get a link to it. And thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.